quick selfie.
Let's do it.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome. Thank you for attending. This panel is about essentially how to develop an art direction for a project and how to enforce it along its production. So I'm going to go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves. Recently, basically came out on Steam for open beta. I've been doing it for a while. I worked with EA as well, so I've worked on established franchises, worked with movie license games, Lord of the Rings, James Bond, Simpsons, those kind of things, along with some sports, also new IP as part of the original Dead Space team, and art direction for Dead Space Extraction before leaving to go do new IP for Square Enix in Seattle, and then got kind of hired into the Atlanta area for CCP, where I was art director for the World of Darkness MMO before it shut down. Before going to Hi-Rez. So I've kind of had the full range as far as working on big studio projects, working on established IP, which has a very identified and already clear brand and visual language for its message, to creating new IP where you basically have to create it all from scratch. Big studios to also small indie development with mobile games and such. So that's essentially the target of what things do you look at in a project when trying to establish what that target is for the visual style? Mm-hmm. What are the goals?
Well, in my experience when it was Brawlhalla, we knew that we weren't a big studio, so you have to kind of scale your expectations of what's possible. So I'm looking at the not just the number of illustrators, but the number of animators, and also what they're going to be able to do tech-wise, and what the implications are for the art there. Because sometimes there are implications, there are limitations. You got to take all that into consideration. Also, you got to think about budget. You got to think about when you want to launch that kind of stuff. So that kind of helps you get a good, healthy perspective on, okay, how grand do we want to go? Do we want something to look like Overwatch, or do we want it to look like Fairly Odd Parents? So yeah, that's been my experience there.
Same here. Is the basic answer. I mean, you want to be able to target a market if you have the budget for that. And like the one game I did with a friend of mine, we gave ourselves 30 days, and 30 days in our free time. So it wasn't, and it was just me and him. He was coding, I was doing the art. So it wasn't. We had grandiose ideas. We had levels to work with, but it came down to how much time can we put in. What is going to look good on different size screens. It was mostly for mobile, and then and what could I actually knock out that looked like something. But then once you establish that part, I wanted to be able to, for the whole 30 days, create the same kind of art, and not because your time is getting short. Now you're kind of just slapping it together. So yeah, that's you take all those things into consideration first. But if given a big pile of cash on this side and a big pile of food over here, let me go at it, and yeah, we can take it as far as we want.
Yeah, I think that's good. Is like both of you guys have mentioned, obviously, limitations around budget and stuff, which definitely plays a part. Also limitations around technology. There's a lot of really good examples, and usually the what I would consider the best visual direction that you see in games during certain platforms are ones where their art style happens to match what the technology needs at the time. Yeah. It's no accident that at a time when polygons and what they were needed and for the amount of enemies, that Halo's enemies essentially were triangles. Mm-hmm. It kept it nice, it kept it clean. Same thing for WoW. If you look at their original art style, they very specifically targeted an art style that catered to their technology and to their platform. I think audience is the other big one, right? Mm-hmm. There's definitely a big difference between looking at an audience for a mobile game or looking at an audience basically on the feelings and kind of the expression that you kind of want from them and what you're looking for. So for instance, with Paladins, it did the full range. Originally it started out, it was like futuristic sci-fi, reality-based and stuff. And then as we were playing more and the game kind of developed more, it was much more lighthearted and kind of fun, and that art style just didn't fit at all. And that was kind of one of the big changes that we made toward kind of a more fantasy stylized kind of look for it. So, all right, we have a late entry here on the end.
Hello.
So would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Matt Canei, art director for Impact Games on Hanago's Holt of Samurai, and I'm a tech artist at Hi-Rez as well.
Okay, excellent. So we talked a little bit about like why, or basically what you target as far as initial goals when you're looking at like, okay, which art style are you going to pick for a game? Mm-hmm. Do you have any input for that for your indie game? Or
I think from an indie perspective, it was many years of development because when it starts as a college project, you're kind of just getting your feet wet. You don't really know, like you think you know what you're doing, but you really don't yet at that stage. So you just kind of just make what you can. And then it comes to, I mean, it applies to AAA and indie. Like, you know, is it a multiplayer or single player? How much story do you want in your game versus how much is gameplay reign supreme? You know, for multiplayer stuff, you can't tell as much story as you can in single player where that's the focus. You're on like a linear rail, for instance. So for indie, since we're a multiplayer game, but also the art style is really driven by the story I'm trying to tell. Since I'm telling a personal story and there's a lot of metaphors, I can't have cinematics in a multiplayer. So we had to decide we're going to tell a story through symbolism in the environments. And then from there, at first it was kind of like we just kind of made what art we could. It was kind of like my own personal style at the time because we didn't have time to really develop it. Then it came to the point where it's like, all right, the quality is just not where it needs to be. It doesn't look how I wanted it to look in my head early on. So it was just going out asking friends that, and I had a really good friend at Telltale that had a similar style to what I was looking for, and talked to him, and he had some advice, and then it just kind of developed. And I tried to put it into like kind of a science so it can be taught. So if I bring on a junior artist or there's style guides there. There's kind of tutorials even where it's like, this is how you execute an organically shaped asset versus an architecture piece, and kind of developed it that way.
Excellent, and I do want to definitely get into some of those kind of tips and tricks and kind of tools to kind of enforce the art direction as well. But for the development, I think like develop is the right word, right? And you kind of mentioned it a couple of times where it's very rare that I feel an art style is completely and totally concrete from the very beginning. Mostly because games are not very concrete from the very beginning. They go through a lot of iteration, and art should be flowing with that, both inspiring it and reacting to it. Do you guys have certain processes or certain workflows in kind of your day-to-day as you deal with that to kind of help refine the art style and kind of get it to that finished, polished state?
Sure. Here's what's funny. When you're working on a game that is going to be like, it's going to have a long development process. So take Brawlhalla, for example, where we're just constantly adding new stuff. It's not exactly like a box product where you just release a thing, $60, there's the game, hope you enjoy the game. But if something's going to go on for a long time, it's kind of like someone drawing a comic for a long time, where you're inevitably going to see their drawings get better because you're just better than you were 3 years ago. It's going to happen. So what do? Sometimes you find the time that you can go back and kind of bring something else up to scratch. Sometimes you find that, okay, maybe I got to have a little self-control. Not like make it worse, but try to make it fit, make it appropriate to what the foundation that you had laid. And within that, you can find ways to improve it. But also, when it comes to, sorry, your original question, one more time.
Just if there's tools, tricks, or certain parts of your process that you feel you kind of learned over time or developed that help during that iteration and that development of the art style in order to get it kind of finished into a concrete place.
Yes. So with Brawlhalla, what we started out with doing, that the game the way it is now, where it has a roster, that actually kind of changed. That wasn't the original plan. And so, like you said, things kind of change while you're developing them. The whole art style, the tech, the whole flow of the game, the flavor of the game, even the target audience might even change a little bit. And so you do have like this grace period before it gets out to the people, where you're going to be able to see it fluctuate and kind of find what it is. And so for me, it was most important for me to pin down who the target audience was, and then to pin down the gameplay and the important visual elements of the gameplay. So to put that into real terms, what it meant for Brawlhalla was the characters. I knew it was going to be largely about the characters, even though now it's a roster. It used to be something where you can make your own character, and then your weapon defined your fight style, and then the features were whatever you wanted it to look like. That turned out to be not the best way for this game to go, so we went with a roster. But still, it didn't change that. The aesthetic of it was that this kind of big head, childlike proportions, very cartoony. We knew that we wanted something cartoony because we knew we wanted something accessible. So that kind of helped us find our own parameters of, okay, how far do we want to go here? Like I said, you got the Overwatch and Fairly Odd Parents. Where in that kind of scale do we want it to be? So once we found that, I also started thinking about, okay, what are the primary visual elements? It's a fighting game, so let's start thinking about the extremities. Fists, feet, heads, the kind of things that are going to matter. You are going to see torsos and arms and thighs. They're not going to matter as much. So it's really about defining early on what are our important visual elements to focus in on. And once we do that, what is an efficient, what's the word I'm looking for? Sustainable way to draw these things. Because we knew we were going to draw a ton of them, and we knew that it was going to be for a very long project period. So start thinking about sustainability, think about your target audience, and think about your most important visual elements.
Whew. That's really one more. Yeah, my answer is short. A lot of sketching, constantly sketching, and the one project is still going on. Is my art style has changed, and in the years that I came up with the idea, the development of the main character changed. It was very human-like, cartoony, and then as time went on, I wanted him to be more gorilla-like, so more animal, and bring in more elements. But then I found out it's too complicated for me to bring it into the game, to see all those details and all those things. And so I've had to scale it back and clean up some of that, just so that it looks like something that I would want to play. Because at first you go for what you like to draw. Well, me as an artist, I like to draw, I like to create, and I think that looks great. But now you have to translate that into a flat drawing, and that's where constantly sketching, constantly going back. But he had a better answer. Mine is just like a lot of work.
That's really good, because seriously, the more you sketch, the more you're going to find out where your area is. Okay, so please listen to what he said. Yeah, sketch a lot.
Yeah, to kind of build off of what he was saying, like we kind of started with like a super realistic style, and then we realized that doesn't really support gameplay very well, because we didn't have a lot of messaging, we didn't have a lot of effects. It was very like, we want this very gritty samurai game that's real, it feels like you're a samurai. And while the mechanics stayed the same, there was a point where it was like, this players don't know what's happening in the game, it's not very clear. So we kind of switched things over, and I kind of organized things in a sliding scale, everything. It's starting from like the highest level. We always saw ourselves, the scale is like, at the time it was Okami was one end of the scale, and like Call of Duty was the other end. And we were at first at like the Call of Duty, and it's like, let's pull that to the middle, see if we can develop a style there. And it kind of worked out. We started getting more comfortable with it. It supported the game. Feedback from players and testers kind of supported what we were doing. So we made a commitment to that. And then from there, it was, okay, we know what our game modes are. We know what the gameplay is. So for most part, environments kept like a neutral color palette, and then we knew we're going to put color splashes where the symbolism is important. We're going to put the symbolism around objectives for both navigation. And so players could kind of get the story, but also know, like, I need to go here. It's more color-centric here. And then also so the characters separate from the environments. We don't want, if it's a 16-on-16 game, which is our target, we can't have all these dudes blending in with the environment. So the characters typically don't have earth tones, so you can see exactly where combat is from multiple distances.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, as far as getting the feedback, iterating through, and kind of evaluating how that's working is always key to it. For me, I like to also make sure, like from the very beginning, establishing like who the players are, taking a look at design. I mean, honestly, visual design is design. And so a lot of the rules that you look at, in fact, one of my favorite books is actually an architecture design book. Because it's basically design. It can be product design, game design, doesn't matter.
Film design is helpful too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it basically, it's all the same process. And so identifying those goals early on, and then while you do want that freedom and that flexibility to be able to iterate in it, the sooner you can kind of put down pillars that you can build on, they're not limitations, but actually create some cohesion and consistency across it, the better off. And so for Dead Space, for instance, we knew we wanted to do horror, right, in space. At least we thought we wanted to do horror until we actually looked into what horror meant. And we were all horror fans and everything else, and then we realized like we were wrong. What we wanted to do was terror, because terror is a much better play style, better experience, better kind of fit in that. And it changed a lot of what we were doing. We got rid of a lot of the gore. We got rid of a lot of the other stuff. We started building suspense. You look at our environments and a lot of the choices we made over even our technology as far as pushing polygons over texture sets so that we could get parallax and get weird shapes and drive dynamic lighting. We built a new lighting system specifically around that. We looked at how comfortable the player felt, and that led to the decision to put our UI entirely in world versus giving a 2D feel outside of it that broke that immersion. And even with the technology, it's a sci-fi game. It takes place in space. There are holograms. There are computers. But if you look at it, even the color schemes that we picked for that stuff and how we interpreted it, where you have like it's orange and it's kind of flickering and stuff, the messaging is reinforced over and over and over again. Technology will not save you. Technology is kind of crappy. You know, it's there, it gets you there. You're not necessarily dying in space from technology, but it's not going to save you when you're facing, you know, the necromorphs and that kind of stuff. And so as we went through with our gameplay, it was dismemberment. We wanted our main guy not to be a Marine, so we didn't do weapons, we did tools. Every weapon we did had to support dismemberment, and you start building this pyramid, right? And you've got these core pillars at the end that hopefully do not change, and hopefully kind of encompass the player experience you want. And then from that, both the design choices, both the NPC choices, the gameplay choices, and the visual choices should be supporting those pillars, and then you refine those out, and they should drive the other decisions that you have. So as you're going in, curious from your guys' perspective, as you're going in and you've got kind of a defined style, right? A general idea, either whether it's on a slider or based on the latest round of sketches and what you've kind of proven out, or kind of like by targeting those important elements and making sure that you have the priority in the right spot for it. Like, how do you guys communicate that out? How are you guys communicating that to the design team, to the programmers, to the artists, or especially as projects grow?
We've always had a pretty small illustration team with at Blue Mammoth. We're working to get some more people in on that, but aside from the animators, and that includes like just the people working on the rig as well as the effects animators, it's been me and sometimes one other guy. And that's really difficult because it's a lot of stuff to do. But when I managed to have another person on my team, which I do now, and we're working on getting some more folks over here. The way that I've tried to manage that and keep everything consistent is there is a teaching phase. There's just naturally going to be, where you have to work with the person and say, okay, so now let's try to get on the same page here, where during the ideation process, I want them to be able to do whatever they want, because I don't want to put restrictions on someone's ideation process. That's just kind of unhealthy, in my opinion. But then, once we see something, okay, this works, now how do we make this and translate it to be something that we can ship? That's where we get our hands dirty a little bit. We start really kind of pushing and pulling and say, okay, so this is how we're going to get it to be our style. Most of the time, that looks like me making an actual draw over style pass on it. And I'm going to do that as many times as it takes, so that until, you know, any other illustrator can get that kind of practice in. Okay, now you do it. What do you think is this going to look like? Make a style pass for yourself, and we're going to keep going back and forth and nudging and correcting and all that stuff. And if we get more people, that also is going to play into hiring. Who are we going to hire? Because that can also play into a team's effectiveness with maintaining a certain style. You know, if we're doing something very cartoony, I'm probably not going to be drawn to the portfolio that is just portraiture. You know, like classical. Like oil paintings and stuff like that. Not totally relevant, and if they don't really have any cartooning experience, that's going to be a very big process for training. But if someone's got the cartoon chops and their drawing is good, not just their painting, but if the quality of their drawing is good, that's going to make it a lot easier to be able to communicate that to that team member and get them on the same page. I have worked with, as I mentioned, Disney before. Style guides all over the place. Style guides are great, and you may hear that from some of the other panelists here, and they're fantastic. We've never had enough time to actually make a style guide just because of the actual shipping schedule of things. It's something that we've wanted in the past before, but also with one or two illustrators, we just never did it. It was something that wasn't entirely time effective for us, but they are good and they are fruitful. So, there we go.
What can you add to that? I don't know. That's it. I've had a hard time sitting down and figuring out the style because I like what I like, and sometimes I see some other style that I like. Oh, I know I can incorporate a little bit of what they're doing over there or what this artist did into what I'm trying to do. But it's about to communicate. It starts with talent. You have to have people with talent, and like he said, if you do portraits and you do classical oil paintings, it's going to be hard to communicate what you're trying to achieve with that particular artist. So I like to collaborate with artists. I do have other artists that I collaborate on various other projects that are not mobile games that are just visual design and graphic design stuff. We have to like the person, but you also have to find the people who can handle the type of style and work that you're looking to collaborate with. So that way, it's easier to get across the ideas that you're trying to do. And one of the things that I do a lot with my clients is ask them for references. When they start explaining to me the style that they're looking for or what they want, I said, well, show me something that's similar, or where your inspiration comes from. And we put all that together before we start working on what they want, because I want to see where they're headed, or the stuff that somebody else before me has done. They said, I don't want you to look at it because I don't want you to be influenced by something that I did not like. And I said, well, I need to see it so that I don't go that way, and I know what direction not to go. So it's important to always have a lot of references and talent.
Yeah, all of those things. And I think for us, I've been the only artist for most of it. Once in a while, I have a junior for a few months here or there, and getting them trained quickly. I split things up, like I mentioned, into a kind of organized list, or sliders if you want to call them that. But we break things down into like structure. It starts with shape, whether an asset's structural in nature or organic in nature, and then there's kind of style guidelines and rules for each. So if I give someone an architecture piece, I'm like, here's how we treat these, and or if it's a cliff face or something, here's how you treat that. And then there's sample assets that are either part of the style guide, or I point them to one that's already in game and say this is reference piece. And then if there's accompanying concepts, which usually there's not because it's a very small team, once in a while there is, and I just kind of give it to them, and then this is going into this world, so usually I prepare base textures for them. It's like you're going to, because I need, like, for example, if I want the same kind of rock, so it looks like, oh, they built this out of rock that they mined from the mountain over there or whatever, so there's some consistency. So they're not grabbing their own ref. They have their base, and then they can paint on it, and they have guidelines for that. Like, here's how you take a photo texture and edit it and paint and do the things you need to do for it to match the style. And then they just kind of run with it, and then feedback sessions.
Yeah, I think all of those are really powerful tools for somebody as an art director or basically an art team in general. And I want to kind of like reiterate, especially with the reference portion. One of the things I've made use of in the past is essentially mood boards. And for those people that don't know, mood board is essentially a collection of other people's art that basically matches the tone and the feeling and the general look you want. So it's very specifically not what it's supposed to look like, but it's what it should be heading toward, or the feeling that it should kind of go from for that. And we do that for our characters on Paladins as the first part of the project, first part of the process for that, where we get the general archetype for the character along with the personality and kind of the tone from movie characters and actresses and different things from different media. And we've done the same thing for like the environment locations in the World of Darkness MMO, where it's Google search images, but it gives you a very like feel of like, okay, this is very much Boston and stuff, and we may do some edits on it and stuff, but you have a very clear like this district feels this way and has this tone and kind of brings you into it. Dead Space, we even started with actually a video. It's essentially a trailer that was made up of a bunch of other horror movies. And so we rescored it, went over the top of it, but it basically was cuts-ups of like Aliens and Event Horizon and all this other stuff. And while there's none of it that is original content that's in there, and none of it had to do specifically with the story of Dead Space or selling Dead Space or anything else, when you watched it, you knew exactly the feel, the tone of the game, where it was going, and what kind of product we were going to make. And it got the team on board with that very, very quickly and easily from the beginning. I think once you've established that big goal, style guides, if you have time, and those can be as simple as like a simple like, hey, here's the shape of all the windows, like, and go from that with simple sketches to fully elaborate, like this is how you handle this is how you repaint these textures, here's how we go from this, or for Smite, there's a lot of rule sets that we are defining from existing kind of architecture for the environments for those as well. And so I think like all of those tools, it basically comes down to kind of communicating something and getting a number of different artists making the right decisions as they go. And that's what an artist is doing. Like every artist on your team, everybody on the team is constantly making creative decisions. And so those rules, those style guides, that kind of stuff, at least in my take, is it's not about limiting their creativity or taking ownership away from somebody. It's about making sure that they have all the information they need to solve that problem visually, and that they're supported as much as possible toward that goal to be successful in what they come up with. And so it's not about removing creativity. It's about helping them have the support they need to make sure that when they do solve the problem visually, that it's successful, and it kind of goes from there. And anything that helps with that communication or better defines that problem or better defines the goal, I think is a valuable tool for a team in a forum. That said, always happens with design a lot, feature creep, right? And I think you brought up is like, oh, okay, this new game came out, or oh my goodness, I just saw this movie, you know? How do you guys deal with that temptation of like, okay, I'm really happy with this. Did you watch Stranger Things? Like, you know, kind of thing. Like, you know, there's definitely different things that inspire us, and we all kind of absorb culture, I think, as well as in our efforts to create it. But how do you guys deal with that? How do you guys deal with the fact of when an artist does something on a team, and it's amazing, and it's awesome, and it's the coolest thing ever, but doesn't fit the game?
Here, Matt, go ahead.
I'd say we have a giant nice-to-have list that is kind of a catch-all whenever we're in a team meeting, and usually it's like one of the big ones was they're like, For Honor, there's a samurai in it, and there's not a lot of combat games. Like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? It's like, okay, it's a realistic Ubisoft game. Like, we're not trying to compete with a giant AAA kind of title. But then he's like, but dude, look at the trailer. It's like, we kind of dissected it and took some time. So like, hey, let's look at it. Let's see, is there anything from there that can kind of drive some ideas and some brainstorming, but limit that. We always time box brainstorming to like 30 minutes or an hour, depending on what we're talking about. And then you're like, we'll put it on the list. We'll come back to it. We have more important things until the game's like pretty much ready and we're in that final quarter of polish. Don't worry about it. We'll come back to it and see. Like, now we go to the nice to have list. Like, all right, we have 3 months. How much from this do we want to do now? It's like, for later. Don't worry about it.
Yep, that's where the sketching process goes in, and I have a rule for myself. The list, if we have time, we can do that. But also, once we get to a certain point, you can't go back. Otherwise, you'll get stuck in trying to do more and more and more. And for that 30-day game, the goal was to finish something and see it all the way through. And of course, ideas come in. There's always something that you can do, but then it's also which you're limited by the creativity is limited by the technology that's available. So then you're stuck to doing the thing that you know that is going to work. But you want to there's a point where all the sketching goes on that after that you're like I can't go back because otherwise I have to change way too much, and now that's going to drag on a lot further.
One specific example that kind of comes up is when Mad Max Fury Road hit, we had like Mad Max fever. And so, man, people were coming out like, yo, you see that? That was dope. And we were like, yeah, we got to do that. And we're like, no, we can't just do that because they just did that. And so
Yeah.
that's where like self-control comes in. And you're like, okay, reel it in. Let's all get excited. Let's allow 10 seconds to talk about how awesome that one scene was. And then we were like, okay, we knew that something like a post-apocalyptic character was on our wish list of characters. We're like, it would be so cool to get these archetypes in there, and that was one of them. So we're like, we should do it now because everyone's excited about this thing. And so we also knew it can't be that. We can't have Furiosa or Max or Immortan Joe in the game because that's terrible, okay? Don't just start nicking other people's stuff. So what we did want to do was get, as you say with the mood boards, what is going to get that mood, that feeling, that kind of thing that made you feel awesome while you were watching that? How are you going to create that but make it yours? And so that's where, as you say, with sketching, we did a lot of iterations on a character. And we were like, okay, this looks like this is headed in a good direction. Let's take this element. Let's take this element. Where can we go from there? We need more iteration that wasn't just like it came right out of Fury Road, but still it was like, because Fury Road, the buzzword nowadays with dark movies is gritty, so it was very gritty. And so ours is a cartoon. We still wanted it to be fun. How do we get more colors in there, for example? Like his hair is just like this aqua color. Stuff like that makes it a bit different, but that can also fit into our game. And then for me, one of the things that, like one of my goals when making something like, especially a character, make it a character. If you can see the character and imagine what his or her voice sounds like in your head, now you're talking. Now you're getting a character. And if it sounded something that maybe didn't come from Fury Road. Maybe it came from something else that felt more like our game. That felt more successful. So yeah, stuff like that comes in, and all these awesome things come because people are making awesome stuff all the time, and you want to replicate that, and that's kind of great, you know. We, as a culture, we like to celebrate all these fun things and all these enjoyable themes, and especially things that remind us of our childhood, like Stranger Things. But yes, when it comes to the design process for your game, show some self-control and have a lot of fun, because there's a lot of fun themes to draw from there.
So maybe tying into that, and kind of a separate, maybe short answer is, what is the toughest thing on a project as someone responsible for the overall visual design and look, have you had to say no to?
Go for it if you have one.
Weird, crazy ideas always creep in, and but once I look at the artwork in action, I realize it doesn't work. You know, so you have to go back and say, "Now we have to take that out." And I have a strong personality, so I'm quick to tell them no in the beginning. But because they keep arguing, I say, "Okay, fine. Let's see what it's gonna look like." And then when you see it, you finally realize now you don't have to explain to the other person. They can actually see it themselves and say, yeah, we gotta go back. We gotta go back. So yeah, that's the realities, and that's the best way that I've dealt with it is just trying it out and seeing it on screen. And once you see it, like that's not it. But you want to do a quick test. Don't spend your whole life trying to get that to go in and then realize it doesn't work. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I think there was a point where I was trying to do really unique treatments on everything, and for time it wasn't reasonable, it wasn't efficient at all. So there was a moment where it was like, all right, there's just going to have to be a sacrifice art style wise where priority is going to become more important. So I had to rate every asset and be like, is this hero, is this mid-level, is this like pebbles on the ground, fine detail, and what's going to get unique treatment and what isn't. And it was hard to get rid of some of that because then it forced processes that I wasn't super fond of. I had to use those now. Now it's like, this is how I do things now, because I can't spend like 2 weeks painting a single texture for a thing. It's like I need texture sheets that I can make like an entire city out of. So there was some research, and like Sunset Overdrive had an awesome workshop at GDC about like they did trims in a certain way that they could construct, you know, an entire city out of, and then also use the same template to just swap like the entire look. So if you wanted a French look, they just had like a French sheet, or they had like a brick sheet or a graffiti sheet, and they just would swap and the whole building would look right. And it was a really cool process. So leveraging some of those things, but it was still a big sacrifice. But in the end, it was for the best, I think.
There have been a few things that people have suggested that would be fun to draw, but would be so jarring for the player that you just have to say no to it. And you know, you got to have some restraint there, because it would be, that would be really fun to draw. But I wish I could give some more concrete examples, but there's probably some stuff that hasn't shipped yet that's recent that is a good example of that. But anyways, when you're working on your projects, that's the kind of stuff that you're going to see. You're just going to kind of know it. If it doesn't fit the vision, you kind of have to cut it. And it sucks sometimes, but it's for the best. So.
Yeah, scoping I think is probably the core. All the examples I was thinking of, like as you guys were talking, I was hearing your examples as well. Scoping usually is that thing that kind of trims it, and there's definitely like, does it fit the game or not, and does it fit the vision or not. But in a lot of ways, it's like, man, no, that's a really, really good ideas. They just don't either fit because of time or budget or constraints going with it. And I think like that's one of the reasons I think that I think was handled really well in Dead Space is that we scoped very early on, and we had that core that we built from. In fact, Dead Space 2 had multiplayer. What most people don't know, though, is actually we had multiplayer up and running. You could toss canisters back and forth in Dead Space 1 very early in production. But when we looked at the cost of maintaining that and finishing that as a development versus actually finishing the single-player experience and establishing the world and the universe that we were kind of passionate about, it didn't make sense as far as a prioritization. And so we cut that. And honestly, I think that decision, which was so difficult because it actually worked, it was playable, it was there, was probably the reason that Dead Space eventually shipped. Especially in EA, where we no new IP had come out in like 14 years, from that studio and stuff. So it's sometimes very, very difficult conversations and difficult things. So the flamethrower for Dead Space actually was cut for a while. It was working, it was in there, but it didn't directly hit dismemberment or any of that stuff. It was a lot of fun. It was like the zero-G aspect of it. It's like no oxygen, it doesn't work. It was cool, it was fun to play, but it didn't actually support dismemberment. It didn't support the pillars, and it was actually cut and turned off and removed for a short period of time. And then we added the little swarm, and it's like, oh, okay, we can use a flamethrower on these guys. And so that was able to come back in.
That's a fascinating metric.
Yeah.
Like, this is so cool, but could it rip someone's arm out of their socket?
Yeah, all about dismemberment. You gotta have bullet points.
Workshop it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it was really good. So we talked a little bit about like influences and whether or not they're coming from the team and cool ideas like, oh my goodness, look what this is, or from external influences of Mad Max or different movies and games. Like, what happens when it comes from like the other disciplines or from marketing or from design and stuff? How do you guys deal with that churn as other departments are trying to find what the game is and running through that iteration and like adapting the art vision as it goes along to make sure that it stays supportive of the actual design of the game?
Do you mean as other team members in their departments working on the game? How do you keep the whole thing consistent?
Well, I mean, we talked about how to keep art consistent
Right.
through a vision and how to develop it. At the same time, though, gameplay's over here, and they're going through the exact same design process, right? They are iterating, they are playtesting, they are finding out that some of their ideas just don't work, or that they should do something different. They're also watching Mad Max and being like, oh my goodness, we should add driving, and different areas to the game. And so, like, not that those things are developed separately. There's obviously a lot of collaboration between design and art, but sometimes they don't flare in the exact same direction. And so, how do you guys make sure that doesn't become a rift and that is cohesive and that art still supports the visual, necessary for the gameplay and for the player experience?
It's simple enough with our group just because we're small for right now, and being small has its benefits. Is that we are able to communicate so easily, just being so, we're all in one little area, and we also use Slack a lot, so that gets used for a lot of feedback loops, which is really good. And if we just need to talk, we just get up and walk to the next desk over. That's great. So we play test in-house a lot, and we also, since we're so small, we do get everyone's kind of input on a lot of stuff, whether it's gameplay or the design of a character or animation effects, or special effects with the animations. And that it doesn't mean that everyone has power to veto, but the input is valid. And that's also our way of making sure that the whole thing sticks together. I don't know how easy that is for like a AAA title, because that's something that I've not worked on yet, something that's that big with that many people working on it. So that's how it works with us, and so far so good.
In my case, it's been feedback has been very helpful in developing the story, not the art and not the gameplay, but the story. When I first came up with the idea, it was very narrow. It was very much about me and what I thought I wanted to tell. And then the more I shared it with people, the questions I got asked started sparking other questions in my mind, and it expanded the full meaning into more of a human story, and something that anybody can relate to, whether you're an artist or not. And so that just helped make it more meaningful, not just to me, but anybody who would touch the game. And that's what also one of the reasons why it's taken me more time, and even had to go back and start writing a real story, not just a made up something that I was going to come up with out of nowhere. But now I went back and actually tried to establish those things of what it was going to do within the game and just the world itself. So to me, it's been helpful to hear other people's take on what I'm trying to say and trying to do, and then think about it. If I was to make it sound more like that, then that kind of, or sometimes people use words and it's exactly what I was trying to say, and I didn't know how to say that, and now that makes more sense. Like, hey, let's try that way too. So it helps. It's always been helpful for me.
Yeah, I can relate to that a lot too, because the Hanago started as I want to tell this personal story. It's my way of grieving and working through personal stuff that happened. And then the more people that got involved and more people became confident in their own skills and they grew over many years, they took ownership of areas. And then it evolved more into like, hey, this is all of our dreams now. So we all feel invested. So we want this to be really fun. We love the story part of it, but we want it to be really fun. So they're like, we need to make sure the art fits the gameplay. So it's just sitting down, like you said, with a small team. It's like I'm co-designing, so I'm sitting down with Connor, who handles primarily design, but it's a collaboration between the two of us. And then we sit down, we talk like, hey, how's the art going to support this for you? Because gameplay has to reign supreme in multiplayer. I feel like most of the time there's exceptions, but for ours, gameplay comes first. Doesn't matter how good the art is if no one likes it, especially in indie where getting the word out there and getting people playing is so difficult and it's so competitive. You have to create the best opportunities for yourself to be successful, and that's fun.
Yeah.
Unless you're going like super experimental art where that can sell the game, even if the game mechanics are weird or whatnot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that the support is there. Like one of the things, so for Hi-Rez, we do patches, and we do them often, sometimes a week apart, most of the time 2 weeks apart. And the other thing we do is we actually put out work while it's still very much in process. And that was kind of actually a difficult transition for me to make, who came from originally console development. Fortunately, I had to stop over in MMO land for a little bit. That kind of got me used to live service and live community. But it is tough. It's tougher as an artist to put your work out there in a state that you know is not complete. And then have faith and learn and appreciate actually the feedback that you get earlier on, that it's actually going to get you to a better end result. But it does lead to major changes, and it does lead to like, wow, we built this whole system, we did this whole thing, and now that's feedback's in, design didn't work out, the art was fine, but like design didn't work out, and now we need to pivot as well. And actually, in that way, it's not that different from working with like a large publisher on a AAA thing where it says like, oh, this is great. The guys in Europe said they hate it. So, the executives show up and they're like, we love the entire game except for this one thing. It's like, but that one thing is connected to all of those other things.
The game.
Right? And so I think being able to pivot as a team, as an individual, is very, very important within the games industry in general. But on the art side, I think you have to be able to sacrifice your babies. You have to be able to kind of like remember that it's the pillars that you're after and what that end goal is, and actually like just take that moment to grieve and then kind of like hop back on and realize that oftentimes it's actually a good opportunity to revisit stuff that you'd already locked, that you wouldn't have had a chance to change and you wouldn't have had a chance to improve. And generally, when you do something a second time or when you touch something a second time, you can make it better. So the second, third, fourth, 10th time as well. So we're about out of time. I do want to do questions. We don't have a microphone up here. We have a microphone stand up here. It's close.
Please shout into the
as the
microphone
questions
stand.
come up, though, I do want to get a quick answer from the panel as people line up for the questions. And it's a pretty simple one, but you've talked a lot about how you guys handle art direction and the qualities that you look for and how that works in the projects you're involved with. As people are lining up, I just want to kind of go down the line. And outside of your own games, who do you look at in the industry? What other games out there do you feel are like the top of the line, best art quality, art direction that you're seeing right now that you look to for reference and inspiration?
I'll start with crazy squeaky noise.
Right.
Is there a ghost? Is there a ghost coming in here?
I don't know.
The Dead Games.
Did you bring a
Dead
Dead Space
Games.
ghost? I'd say Naughty Dog probably is pretty close to the top. I mean, the stories they tell, Uncharted series and Last of Us, and they do some pretty incredible stuff on the hyper real side and with nature. I think they handle nature better than any game studio. And then on the flip side, of course, Blizzard.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to call out Blizzard for any style like is kind of the top of the game.
I think Half Brick.
Oh yeah.
I grew up in the age of cartoons. They never end, though. It's still the age now, the cartoons. But of course, in my day, I'm an old guy. It was just the TV, no internet. And so very cartoon style. I like comic books, so a very comic book style. Just very animated looking art. That's what I'm about. That's what I love.
Blizzard's definitely killing it right now, especially with the folks that they've got working on Overwatch with that art style. That's doing a lot of things right. where they're getting a lot of things where it's cartoony, but it's kind of realistic, but it's definitely cartoony. I mean, this gorilla just started screaming. You know, it's like, it's very, very good. Studio MDHR, the guys that are doing Cuphead, Chad and Jared are unreal. Like the artistry, the sheer artistry happening in Cuphead. Guys, if you haven't seen the trailer for the 100th time, please watch it for the 100th time. And I mean, you could teach a class on that. So that's another one, even though we're not necessarily going to look like that. I mean, they're pulling from a specific era, but the method, the way that they are doing it, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. There's a lot that they're doing right, whether you draw like the actual, okay, here's what they're doing right with animation and the anticipation in the animations, and painting their backgrounds, or sometimes filming like actual built sets for their backgrounds and then using that as a scrolling background. They're doing a lot right there. And finally, I'm an unapologetic Nintendo fanboy, and the level of polish that they have in their titles is great. Like it or hate it, those games look good every time. And yeah, so that's kind of what I'm shooting for, is just trying to make it look good.
Excellent. So, all right, so are there any questions from the audience? If you want to come up and use the microphone, they went a line, I guess, or I'm not sure.
Is that the book 100 Things I Learned in Architecture School?
Yes, it is. Oh, it's so good. So.
I had a question, basically, in regards to switching art styles. When you do have to switch art styles, how easy or difficult is it to do that? And is there a certain process you have to go through in order to transition between them?
I've had to do that on a few occasions for different projects. That was one of the big things with Disney. They, you know, even if every artist is going to draw it a little bit different, it has to look like it came from Disney. And so I enjoy that challenge. So for me, it's really about get my reference together, get some practice in, and then draw something that is not the exact pose in the reference piece. And if I can do that, it's kind of like people who do voice impressions. If you can say something that isn't famous from that person, and it sounds like them, you're on your roll. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think like changing, it's difficult because there's things that you like and maybe reference throughout, and usually the goals of the game don't necessarily change just because the style needs to change, and so but it's problem solving, and so it's the same way as like you know if you look at Smite, you know there's like we want our backgrounds to be slightly muted, we want to use high contrast in the characters and to the VFX. You know, in order to make the characters pop and make the gameplay pop and make it easier to read, right? That goal, right, and that establishing, you know, pillar for the art direction for Smite hasn't changed, even though if you look at Smite and look at the very, very early days of Smite and Alpha, the actual look of the game, the look of the champions, the look of the different areas has changed quite a bit, you know, and continues to evolve, right? It's a living thing. And so I think some of that is just you sit down, you reevaluate it, you look at what worked, what didn't work, and you look at what could possibly work within that new style or in that new, you know, basically problem that you're trying to solve.
And it's going to happen anyways because you get bored. It's a lot of constraints and when it comes to certain particular type of art, and you get tired of just seeing that same constant. And so my solution is to try a different style anytime I want to just for fun and just leave it to the side, or even draw for myself and take some time off and then draw the stuff that I like to draw. And when I'm forced to do visual design for corporate companies, then I'll find time to draw skulls for myself because that stuff is never going to make it into the work that I'm doing, but I have to get it out of my system. Otherwise, I really get tired.
Oh, totally. Like when I was working on Dead Space, everything I did outside of that, as far as home like work and everything else, was the most cartoony, soft, friendly stuff absolutely possible. Because my days were filled with screaming and like darkness and everything else. And I love both of them, but you need that kind of balance, right? It's like if you're doing mature and doing gritty and doing dark at work, you need that kind of balance of like, wow, that's a cool little cartoon frog, you know,
Not dismembered.
So.
Okay. Yeah, as a non-artist that's a game dev that needs to work with artists, what's the best thing that I can do for not you, but like as bringing in an artist? What's the best thing that I can do to convey what I want, but allow them to have freedom in that sense as lead artist?
So,
Like,
yeah, I'll actually answer this. So I was talking to the head of our HR recently. Hi-Rez has started doing lunch talks where people are sharing knowledge and different stuff across the disciplines. And this is actually one of the topics that came up that she specifically came and asked me about if I would do a talk on is how do you talk to an artist? And specifically, how do you give feedback to artists, right? And I know that can be difficult, and if you, especially if you don't feel like you have the right words or you have the background for it or how to provide it. And usually where I see that going wrong, even from artist to artist communication, let alone from other disciplines, is when people try to give answers, right? And so very similar to most other things is the best way you can communicate with an artist or provide feedback or do that stuff is just explaining, what the issue is, how you feel, and basically your opinion and your kind of side to it, but doing it from like, what is the problem, right? And then letting the artist solve it. Usually where that goes wrong is where you're trying to not only identify the problem, but you're also trying to solve it. Like, oh, maybe if it's blue, or maybe if it's like whatever. Well, no, go back to like, you know what, it just doesn't, it makes me feel sad, right? Like that's better feedback than maybe if it was blue. And it also allows you, because at that point you're describing a problem, it allows you to be a lot more specific as far as for what your feedback is. And this is often advice, as I was talking to designers or talking to level designers and stuff, is when they come in, one of the first things I tell artists as far as talking the other way to designer side is if they come in and they're like, hey, I need, a crate right here. Never say okay, right? Because they don't need a crate right there. Your question should be, your response to that request should be a question, which is like, oh, what are you going to use it for? Or what are you really after? Because usually it's not the fact that design to be fun needs a crate right there. It's because they need low cover and they need something to break up the center of the room. And honestly, a stove would make more sense in a kitchen than a crate. And so it creates that dialogue. You get to talking about it, you understand the goals from both sides, and usually you'll end up with like, if there's option A from design and option B from art, that option C is usually a better one that both sides believe in a lot more. And that comes from dialogue, and that only comes if there's actually communication and providing that problem for that artist to solve.
Yeah, I would say what I see a lot too is when I'm communicating with programmers, a lot of times they try to attack art problems with logic. And sometimes there's not logic to art, and that's okay. There has to be an understanding of that you can rewrite real world rules, ooh, that's a mouthful, to match whatever you want your art direction to be. It doesn't have to follow like exact Earth physics or exact the way color works on Earth. As long as it's consistent across the whole game, you can get away with some liberties, and sometimes that's difficult for more logically based people giving feedback. They're like, but gravity works like this, and you can't have this thing in the background, crystal spinning and floating. It doesn't make sense. And you're like, it doesn't have to. It's a game.
Or you get like,
We want it to be fun.
it's like it's fine for gameplay elements, but not for art apparently. But no, totally. Like I can't count how many times, like after a discussion of like, no, we need to do the architecture this way. It's not going to really look very good. We need to kind of change this layout. I later get Google references or Wikipedias that show that yes, sometime in the real world, the building was actually built this way. And my response is like, okay, we're still not building a building that way because it looks wrong, and just because it physically has happened doesn't make it correct, right? But yeah.
You guys have pretty much said it. Your answer was very thorough. I just remember one situation. This was before I worked at Blue Mammoth. Is at some other studio, and someone, and I'm pretty sure it was a programmer just because they were speaking in like, what is logical. I have the fortune of working with programmers that I love, and they're really good with working together. But this dude was like, that doesn't work. Look, one time I was sitting in traffic, and I was like, this is your argument for how to make the game fun? And he was explaining to me like what was happening. I don't remember all the details, but I was like, what? Like, is the game fun? Like you said, gravity doesn't work that way. That thing wouldn't be spinning. You're like, yeah, but it's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, there was, I think it was John Howe, one of the Lord of the Rings artists, was, I think it was him, and he was drawing a dragon and had a big claw on the end of its wing. And some guy was like, that's anatomically incorrect. It wouldn't be like that. They wouldn't have a claw right there. And he goes, but it's so cool. And then he kept drawing it. I was like,
Can you bring me a dragon and show me how the claw doesn't work right there?
We've got a focus group of dragons coming in that are going to But yeah, so is it fun?
My answer is a mood board mentioned earlier. That to talk to an artist, you have to be visual and be ready to show. That's it. You can tell me stuff all day long, and I'm pretty good at translating words to pictures. I've been a tattoo artist for a long time also, so people come to me with the weirdest ideas, and they
Should've
want
done a
to.
panel on that.
Right. They want a pile of stuff, and I'm like, where do you want this? And now I have to make it look like it's something that makes sense. And but having references or some kind of illustrations or drawings that come from somewhere, anywhere, it doesn't matter. Even if you're gonna start cutting and pasting literally to say, I want this type of body, this type of colors, this type of something, and then that's how you talk to an artist, and then give them get and explain what you want in the end, and let the artist figure out the solution for it and how to best make it look and how to best make it work. And then, but before you go through all of that, find the artist that does the kind of work you like. That's it. I mean, they have to have that art style. Don't contact an artist and say, hey, can you draw like so and so? I want that artwork. Like, well, go talk to so and so. That's what he gets paid for. Yeah, try to find the artist who does that work that you like.
All right. I think we're just about out of time. Additional question? Yeah.
Yeah, let's go one more.
In a small team, like 'cause I'm currently at university, where you have a few people working on character art and a few people working on environment art, maybe one UI designer, how do you make sure that the art style between those different divisions of art still work together?
Okay.
I think there's a couple of ways to handle it, and some of those scale to larger teams, and some of those work great just while they're small. I think for the small group, and usually if people are shared vision, obviously looking at reference, the mood boards, the different tones, having a lot of conversation, and you can get a small group of people that almost have a like mindset, the same goal. It's very clean and clear between them. There might be some discrepancies, but you can have a team that works as a cabal, right, and still be like still have the confidence to kind of move forward and still cohesive as far as the actual visual direction or the quality bar, but it does take a lot of communication and a lot of review. One of the things you see when that scales to a larger group, because it gets more and more difficult the more people you add into that, is that you do end up with like a single art director kind of role, which is usually not the fact that, like, a lot of people think like, oh, art director, you get to make all the decisions and it's great stuff, and like, oh, same thing for like game directors. It's not true. Right, like your general case is to basically empower your team, and like I said earlier, is make sure that the goals are defined and what needs to happen and is prioritized properly so your team can be successful. But it's still the team that drives where it needs to go and to the quality that you're able to reach to. And so what that art director usually does is not come down from a mountain with like, okay, here's the decision, here's the decision, here's the decision. They serve as the tiebreaker. They serve as the person who doesn't have to be narrow or focused into the super detail, that can actually still see the forest and that can make those decisions or make those calls when those groups disagree or when stuff starts to step out of line because they've been focused. They haven't noticed that they've been veering left slightly for too long.
In my experience, when we had someone that was separate doing environment stuff and we had to keep it consistent, for us it was about finding the right person. Now, what that looked like was that we ended up contracting a very talented guy named Adam Fenton who had worked on Epic Mickey, stuff like that. So we're like, okay, we saw his portfolio. He can do these backgrounds that are well painted that also work with cartoons. Like they would complement what's happening in the foreground. And so we contracted him to do some of the ones that are actually in the game right now. And there was back and forth. There was communication. Maybe even I would do some paint over sometimes if it was like, okay, this needs to be adjusted like this. Sometimes it was a straight up paint over, or sometimes it was like, here's what I did, make that work, you know, finish it the way you would. But yeah, so my answer to that is, especially if you're small, find the right people that can complement what's happening on top of an environment and vice versa.
I'm going to contrast from that a little bit, and I feel like, because my project's unbudgeted, I can't be so selective. Like we have to try our best to get the most talented people we can, but sometimes you have to compromise and be like, okay, the only person that's submitted to this role, they're okay, they need some development, but they're not really exactly what I would want to work on this particular thing. And you do the best that you can for like a really small indie or student project. Sometimes you just have to compromise. You hope that you can get everyone on the same page, but it's just communication. And I think setting the foundation of the game in a way that anyone can understand at any talent level, like if you're sharing shape language between different departments that's consistent, you're using the same kind of shapes in your levels that you're using in your UI or using in your characters, or you have separation to make sure that you can tell the difference. And you can communicate that to anyone, a junior person or a senior person, and at least you get, if you can get like 80% of that taken care of, maybe the little discrepancies aren't as big of a deal for an indie. For a large production, you can just hire people and it's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it depends on the scale too. Like
Yeah.
one of the things I definitely say is outside that leadership, one of the tricks, I guess, or whatever, but like one of the processes that I started, the first time I used it was on Dead Space. And I've used it on every game I've worked on since. It's specifically around environments. Is I hire a specialist that's in the texture and material category. They can do other stuff, but they are responsible for textures. And they do two things. One is they go in front of the team and they create the texture library or the material library that the rest of the team will pull from when they're creating their textures, which gives us a leg up as far as consistency. And then they go behind the team and they do the slight modifications and the tweaks and everything else. Because I think one of the things around consistency and overall quality that you get from that is, at the end of the day, you really want your project to look like it was done by a single artist, right? That it's all unified, that it's identifiable when you see a screenshot, when you see an asset, when you see whatever, you know what game it came from, it fits and supports the gameplay, and that it looks like it was done by an artist. Hopefully the best artist that ever lived, but a single artist, right?
And the only thing I was going to add is be confident. You're going to have an art director or somebody who is in charge, and that person has to be confident. I have a strong character, personality. I can get loud, and I rule. So if I say this is how it's got to be done, that's how it's got to be done. And I work with a lot of artists, and some artists are quiet, some artists are introverts, and you have to guide them. And so it takes a lot of hands-on. It's a lot of hands-on. It's not easy.
All right.
Cool.
Wait, do we have time for one more, or is that a thumb up, or one more? One more.
One more.
One more.
Come on up.
All right.
All right, so being a game artist, do you suggest focusing on only 2D and illustration, like if that's what your strong suit is, or to get involved with the 3D and technical aspect as well? Because I know in smaller game companies, like you have to wear a lot of hats, right? But in the bigger game companies, it's suggested you focus on one thing and like make it the strongest you can. So I was just wondering, like, as an artist, like what should we focus on, like if we're interested in both?
I think it depends on what your end goal is.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times if I talk to people when they get in the industry, they start out with all these questions for me, and I'm like, whoa, can I ask you a question first? What do you want to do? And so it is very different, and it depends on what you want, like what you want to do. If you want to be part of an indie team, if you want to wear a lot of hats, if you want to develop that's a very different goal as far as to target studios with, to target your portfolio with, to target your skill set with. Then it is like, okay, I want to be part of the industry, and eventually I want to work on like AAA, or I want to work on these other things. From a percentage standpoint, the AAA studios, the people with 300 people teams, hire more people, right? And they are very specialized. And so if you were going up for a role of an environment artist, or a prop artist, or a character artist, or 2D concept artist, you are going up against the best in the world that do nothing but that. And so my recommendation, if that is your goal and that is where you want to go, is that you specialize, and you specialize well, and just make sure you have some contextual information about how your piece of the puzzle fits in with everything else, right? And so you can always grow and you can always expand it. I would say anybody that's looking at 2D from it's visual development, it's from the concept side, not just Illustrator kind of side, which also has a role in the games industry. I recommend that you have some basic knowledge of 3D. It'll make you faster. It'll make your understanding of what makes your piece successful and how your role interacts with the other roles like around you as far as a character artist or an environment artist in 3D. It'll make that easier, faster, and just a better overall collaborative relationship if you're working on that.
Yeah, I agree with, think about your goal. For me, I found that my goals kind of shifted a little bit, where maybe at one point I was really shooting for something where I'd be designing for 3D. I'd be doing 2D work that was for the purpose of seeing something in 3D. That kind of changed where I found out I really liked doing that, but I also really enjoyed finishing something, production art, getting it ready to ship. As such, I started working with Blue Mammoth, and I really like that we're committed to doing just hand-drawn stuff. It works for us, and it certainly works for me, because it fits my goal as a designer.
How much time do you have? That's another question to ask.
Yeah.
If you don't need to worry about paying your own bills, then you can have 24 hours a day and work on different things at the same time. It comes down to the list of goals. What do you want to accomplish, and then how much time do you have? I don't have time to learn 3D. I would love to do animation. I don't have time to learn all that stuff. I want to finish the things that I'm working on. So my idea is to collaborate with other artists, find the artists that I'm compatible with, and let them do that other part. I participated in hackathons where there are 3D artists working in my team, and my job is just to do the 2D stuff. And that's cool with me, because I just like to draw, but we don't have a whole lot of time either. It's only one weekend, so we have to knock stuff out pretty fast. So how much time do you have? That's another question.
Yeah, I agree with all those points, and I'll add that the way I look at it for, like, if you're in college and you're getting ready to graduate, I feel like let's say you have 10 skill points. I'll use a game analogy. College, automatically just skating through your classes, you're going to use 5 of them and allocate. The other 5, you're going to have to choose with your own additional efforts where to put them. And large studios, they're going to want, like, not 10 for your skill points to be in one thing. We want a 10-point environment artist to get in the door. But small teams might be like if I'm looking for a generalist, I might be like, I want like 4 in this and 4 in that, because that's awesome. But it depends like what your specific goals are, like Thomas said. You have to know and target. It's like you're marketing yourself. You target to the most targeted group that you can. It's the same when you're marketing yourself to a studio. It's like you're going for Blizzard, you want your portfolio to reflect their kind of style as close as you can get. Or a Hi-Rez, you want a character that might look like a Smite god, or and so on and so forth. General, for indie, you want to show that you can do multiple things well.
Yeah.
Just kind of depends.
Yeah, generally it's just as far as hiring goes. That's about the last comment on that, but it's the easiest choice for someone who's in a hiring position is if you have stuff that you have either done in the past or represented in your portfolio that is plug and play. If I see something that I'm like, regardless of the role, regardless of the broadness of it, is if I see something that's like, okay, I would put that in the game right now, that is a much clearer path to getting hired than any other path. And so whether or not it's targeted portfolios, whether it's targeting a specialist, whether like all these other things are really questions you need to ask yourself and kind of figure out what your goal is. But from that should be the end result, right? Is that you want to present yourself, present your work in a way that makes it as easy as possible to say, I would ship that from a hiring manager or an art director standpoint. All right, so we are out of time. I do want to say thank you so much for attending the panel, and thank you so much, panel guests, for doing this. And thank you. Have a good day.
If you want.